Hey folks, Buck Rizvi here. I am here with a good friend of mine, Jonathan Bailor. And if you don't know who he is, I thought I would just give you a quick thumbnail sketch before we get into the Q&A on his new book. So Jonathan Bailor pioneered the field of wellness engineering and is the founder and CEO of the acclaimed weight loss and diabesity treatment company, Sane Solution. He authored the New York Times bestseller, The Calorie Myth, has registered over 26 patents, so he's been very busy, has spoken at Fortune 100 companies and TED conferences for over a decade, and has served as a senior program manager at Microsoft. So he and I share a bit of a background coming from the tech space, where he helped create Nike Plus Connect training and Xbox Fitness. And I actually had a Nike Plus Connect device at one point. His work has been endorsed and implemented by top doctors from Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, and UCLA. A summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa graduate of DePaul University, Bailor lives outside Seattle with his wife, Angela, and new daughter, Avia Gabrielle. So please welcome Jonathan. Jonathan, are you there? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
All right, fantastic. Hey, man, thank you for joining me on this little impromptu podcast, and thank you so much for sending me a copy of your new book.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope you liked it.
I am. I've started to speed read it, and it's a fun read. It's an engaging read, which I can't always say is true for books, especially health books, right? And so I put together, and you haven't seen these questions ahead of time, so this is really going to make it interesting. And we'll see. We'll tell if Jonathan starts blushing on any of these questions. So I put together a set of questions. I wanted to ask the questions that I think our listeners would want to hear the answers to. And so why don't we just kick it off? My first question to you is, you and I both know, coming from tech, there's this concept of yet another something, right? So yet another blah, blah, blah. So why yet another diet book? I'd call it YADB, yet another diet book.
Well, the name diet, or the word diet, is in the title. The thing that sets the Setpoint Diet aside from every other diet that's ever been created is it is the only protocol that's been designed specifically to reduce the inflammation in your brain, the dysregulation amongst your hormones, and the dysbiosis in your gut that elevates what's known as your set point weight, which is the thing that ultimately determines your long-term weight. So while things like, excuse me, the keto diet, the paleo diet, Atkins, veganism, all of these different diets, they have maybe intentionally or unintentionally stumbled upon one piece of the puzzle to lower your set point. They have never been engineered specifically to target all three aspects of lowering your set point. And that's what this protocol does that nothing else does.
Okay, so I heard you say gut, I heard you say brain, I heard you say hormones. I'm just making a note of that, that you address all three.
That is correct. And we actually even go broader. We cover psychological aspects, things along those lines. And that is really important because, as you also know from software and tech, if you have a really fast processor in your computer but not enough RAM, doesn't matter. Chain is as strong as its weakest link. Same thing applies with healing the body.
Okay. So you would say it's a more holistic approach than some of these other, would you call them fad diets? You mentioned a couple out there like keto.
I would call them, I think the keto diet is extremely effective at getting you into ketosis. Okay. I think the paleo diet is extremely effective at getting you to eat like Paleolithic people. The set point diet is extremely effective at lowering your set point weight. I personally think, to end the diabesity epidemic, lowering our set point weight is what evidence suggests is the key. And that's why I'm so excited about this way of eating.
It's really interesting you say that, because I know I have a set point, because I can, eat little or eat a lot, and I always wind up, boom, going right back to where I sit. And I sit at right around 200 pounds. That's my sort of walking around weight if I don't do anything, right? I'm not obese. Most people say, yeah, you're not overweight, but I know I could lose a few pounds, right? So it's not I do want to lower my set point weight, which is why I'm really intrigued by your book. So I noticed that there's something else in here, which is a 21-day program. Why 21 days?
What I've found, so the first book was written while I was still an engineer at Microsoft, and it was much more of an outline of the problem rather than a protocol to solve it. And what we have found since then, so I have since left Microsoft, although it was an incredible place to work. I have spent the past, probably, I don't, at this point, 4 years. It's been a long time since the first book,
Okay.
building a wellness technology company where we've had the opportunity to work with tens of thousands of people to help them to implement the general prescriptions from the first book. And what we found is that for a lot of people, especially in the baby boomer generation, who have been so misled and because of that yo-yo dieted so many times, to truly heal their metabolism, it's a little bit like we need to provide open heart surgery or hip like replacement surgery on their metabolism. And just like when you have a major surgery, right after that surgery, you have to have at least 3 weeks of this is my number one priority. Healing is my number one priority. Therapeutic wellness is my priority. We found that for a lot of people, having 3 weeks of this is your number one focus gives them that tipping point that then allows them to be successful in the long term.
So that's, I've heard that 3 to 4 weeks is about the time that a habit really ingrains, right? So it's almost like the set point habit that we're putting, because this is a lifestyle, right? This is going to be now not just 21 days and I can do but go back to doing it at whatever the hell I want, right? But that I'm going to enjoy having a lower set point and continuing on. So that's really cool. You mentioned something about brains, plural. Why are brains so important?
The plural of brains is that you have two brains. One is this brain, and then you may have heard the term your second brain or your gut. Okay. And so when we refer to both of your brains, that's what we're talking about. So first brain is your head, your second brain is your gut. And if you wonder, why are we talking about your gut as a brain? Well, if you think about what your brain up here does, is it helps you to interact with the external world. So it takes what's external and helps you process it internally. Well, what does your stomach do? It takes things that are external and helps you process them internally. And what's beautiful about this is that your hormones, it's really easy and cool to understand, is that your first brain communicates with your second brain and vice versa via hormones. Okay. And that system is designed to maintain health and slimness automatically. We would have not survived as a species if we were doomed to be obese and cancerous and diabetic.
It's designed to self-regulate?
Exactly. Homeostasis is the key.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm a big believer in the second brain and the importance of the second brain. I like the fact that you mentioned the three things. We'll get into the third. Well, we kind of touched on that. The gut, the brain, the gut brain and the brain, and the hormones as being the signals, messengers.
Yes, those are the tripartite, the trifecta of what is communicating. Okay. Not just, and this is a really important point, Buck, because some of your listeners may have heard, like in the 80s or 90s, I heard this term set point. I've kind of heard it, but it was kind of a theory. Like, why are you talking about it now? Right. Well, in the last 10 years, there has been breakthrough research, both in all three of those areas, brain, gut, and hormones, that didn't exist in the 80s and 90s, that has taken the set point from a theory to a fact. Just like we know that blood sugar is homeostatically balanced and that the breakdown of that is called diabetes, and that blood pressure is homeostatically balanced and the breakdown of that is called hypertension. Energy is supposed to be homeostatically balanced, but the breakdown in that system is the disease, as characterized by the American Medical Association, of obesity. So when we start treating it like a disease and we start treating it with compassion and science rather than shame and guilt and moralization, we can really make a lot of progress.
Oh, that's huge. So what I'd noticed that there's an approach that you're taking with the book. And as I was scanning through it, and maybe, did I catch this right? That you seem to be taking a what to do, not necessarily what not to do?
This is extremely important, Buck. And this, back to your earlier question of what another diet book, yet another diet book. What in some ways is anti-diet about this book is just what you said. Diets have generally been defined by no, not, nothing. Shame, starvation, what is bad, wrong, don't do these things. Okay. Modern human psychology tells us very clearly, there's a very famous study called where don't think of a white bear. If you want to make a human being preoccupied with something, tell them not to do it or not to think about it. Then your brain will just, don't eat sugar, or don't be nervous, or don't, fall asleep. I really want to fall asleep. Try harder.
Don't look at the girl in the red dress. Sorry.
Exactly. That doesn't work. So instead, what we need to do, and you see this in the actual organizations that do successfully help people change behavior, it's always about substitution. It's always about pursuing the positive rather than attacking the negative. And that's the approach that we take in this protocol.
Okay. I'm glad I hit that on. I was like, where's the no list? I'm looking for the don't. It wasn't there. So I was like, okay, this is a different approach, a kinder, gentler approach, it seems. You probably get this a lot. Is fruit the enemy?
As a general rule, things like, fruit is good or bad, carbs are good or bad, fats are good or bad, are not helpful. What I have found to be most helpful is to say, what are the measures of whether or not a food is helpful or harmful in lowering your set point? Okay. And then let's look at each food individually and say, does it lower your set point or elevate your set point? So are there fruits that elevate your set point? Yes. Are there fruits that lower your set point? Yes. So what we need to do is identify fruits, vegetables, proteins, any type of food group, any type of classification. Whether they lower your set point or elevate your set point.
Makes sense. Okay, I like that. So that was a very politically correct way of saying, yes, there are probably some fruits you want to avoid that are high in fructose. And you talk about that in the book. I know in keto, for some people, like keto said, fruit, no way, right? Time out. Don't touch, just keep it out of the equation for now. I don't eat a lot of fruit. My wife loves fruit, so she keeps apples and berries and things like that, but we don't keep a lot of high fructose, oranges, pineapples, things like that around. So that's interesting. What's your take on dietary supplements? And that's a broad question, I know.
Just very similar to the answer I just gave. There are supplements which without question have proven to help lower your set point. And there are supplements that I would actually say, well, I don't know if I've seen supplements that would elevate I haven't seen any clinical research that shows there are supplements that elevate your set point. There are certainly supplements that would have no impact on your set point. Okay. So certainly there's an entire chapter in the book where we talk about what nutraceuticals. So these are substances such as, for example, L-carnitine or isolated omega-3 fatty acids like EPA and DHA, which especially EPA and DHA have literally a dose-dependent relationship with neurological inflammation in your brain. Now, let me unpack that for a second. We can actually look at rodent models because it would be illegal to do this in humans. And we can see that we talk about neurological inflammation. We can give a rodent MSG, and the more MSG we give the rodent, the more inflamed their brain becomes. Okay. Bad stuff happens. Then we can give them DHA and EPA, omega-3 fatty acids.
Like fish oil, usually in fish oil, right?
Exactly. And we can literally just turn down neurological inflammation. Wow, so does a fish oil supplement that is high in EPA and DHA lower your set point? It absolutely reduces inflammation in your brain. Therefore, yes, it would lower your set point.
It can contribute to lowering the set point. Okay.
Exactly.
So there are categories, and you talk about this in the book. There are categories of supplements that would be helpful. There are some that are neutral, it sounds like, and then there are some that are just, why the hell are you doing this? I would imagine. I'm not a big fan of stimulants, for example. People do energy drinks and supplements that drive, try to boost their metabolism unnaturally, have a lot of caffeine, that kind of stuff.
And Buck, more generally, it's also a question of what is our goal? Let me give you a very specific example. There are substances that are non-caloric, which we wouldn't consider to be supplements, that do have a dramatic, clinically proven effect on your set point. 2 examples: SSRIs. Okay. Absolutely elevate your set point. And this is known very broadly in psychiatric circles, right? You prescribe someone an SSRI, almost inevitably with no change in lifestyle, they will gain weight. And on the other end of the spectrum, this is not an endorsement.
Let me interrupt you for a second, just so people understand what SSRIs are, because that's a technical term. But that typically is anti-anxiety medication, for example.
Yes,
antidepressants.
So anti-anxiety, antipsychotics.
Antipsychotics. So just people, if I'm taking my anti-anxiety meds, you're probably taking an SSRI.
Yes. Okay. And then on the other end of the spectrum, again, not an endorsement, but nicotine has been shown to help lower the set point. And this is often why individuals gain weight when they quit smoking.
Okay. So we're not saying you don't say go run out and start lighting up or doing vaping or anything like that in the book, I take it.
Correct. We do not. And I mean, it is important to understand that,
Yeah.
we want to look at this from a holistic perspective. And there are things, there are all sorts of, I mean, if you take anabolic steroids, you will absolutely change your body composition. That doesn't mean it's a good, healthy idea to take anabolic steroids.
Right. No, I mean, I know you cover those things, and you cover them dispassionately, in the sense that you let people know, hey, here are the dangers of doing that, versus, but they could have, here's the reason why people might lose weight if they're smoking cigarettes, right? But we all know what the negative outcome is. There's an interesting approach, and this is going to be the stuff people hate to talk about. I know I don't like to think about it using the E word, which is exercise, right? When I think exercise, I feel like I have to labor and do something that I don't want to have to do. But you have an interesting sort of low time commitment approach to this. Can you share that a little bit about that?
I mentioned just a second ago anabolic steroids, which is not something that's recommended in the book, but I want to bring that topic up again as we talk about exercise, because I think all of us on some level know what anabolic steroids do. They're testosterone. And if someone takes testosterone, they could sit on the couch and eat donuts and drink Mountain Dew, and they'll build muscle and burn fat. That's what steroids do.
Okay.
Now, if you look at how could I healthfully, for example, optimize my testosterone levels so that my body builds calorie hungry, lean muscle tissue and burns fat, we say, well, how could we do that in a healthful way? One of the ways is a very specific form of exercise, which is very slow, very safe, very challenging resistance training, which is radically different than running outside for 2 hours, which actually suppresses testosterone production. And this applies equally to women, because women having optimal testosterone levels is extremely helpful when it comes to long-term fat loss. So exercise, we've found, is most effectively thought of as a mechanism to change the levels of certain hormones in your body to create a more anabolic versus catabolic state in your body. And resistance training that is very slow, controlled, and intense for short durations is the most effective way to cause that hormonal change.
So are we talking about 30 minutes a day, 90 minutes a day? What are we looking at in terms?
We're looking at about 10 to 20 minutes once or twice per week. And that is literally true, because if you're doing this method of exercise correctly, you can't do more than that. So let me give a kind of a silly example. If I just asked you to sprint all out for 2 hours straight, you can't, right? The body's energy systems don't work that way. If you're sprinting, by definition, you can't do it for a long period of time. The same thing applies here. If you're doing a leg press movement and you do it till what we would call eccentric failure, which is, we talk about it more in the book. The point is, you will be sore to the point where if you try to do it again the next day, or you try to do it for 2 hours, you just physically can't.
You need a recovery time.
Exactly.
Whatever that is. Yeah. Okay. So 10 minutes twice a week sounds like something anyone can do. But let me just clarify a little bit. I'm kind of on the cusp of being a Gen X and a Boomer. So can Gen Xers and Boomers do what you prescribe in the book?
This form of what we call eccentric resistance training is most exciting because literally anyone can do it at any level of fitness, because it is slow and controlled. It doesn't require like athletic movements. And in fact, Buck, some of the most exciting studies have been done on people who are in their 80s and 90s, where they perform this form of exercise. And we actually see that at a chromosomal level, we see physiological changes in telomere length, which is a literal reversal of aging.
Saying they're going to live longer.
And actually their body
extending
is
life, because I know telomere
exactly
a bit. Yeah. Wow. Okay. If you can show that in a clinical environment and verify that, that's super exciting, especially for, I'm in my 50s. I'm thinking, actually 70 doesn't look that old from where I sit, so I want to be fit, strong, have the brain firing on all cylinders. So thank you for answering that. Now you cover, and we mentioned in your bio about diabesity. We didn't really get into what that is. Could you share with us what diabesity is, why it's important for us to pay attention to it?
Diabesity is literally going to cause the end of the world if we don't do something about it. And I'm not exaggerating, because if we look at the rates of diabetes and we look at the rates of overweight and obesity, and we look at the statistical probability that if you have one, you're going to get another. Mm-hmm. If we do not do something, 90+% of our population in the Western world will have both obesity and diabetes, AKA diabesity, within the next 20 years. And as a, just even from an economic perspective, we cannot support that as a country. And the key thing here, Buck, is to understand two important facts. One is, and this will make sense in a moment, smoking is horrible. This is the second time we've talked about smoking. No, smoking is horrible. No one should smoke, but it's important to understand that only 10% of people who smoke will get lung cancer. Okay. That's still a lot, still way more than we would want to ever get lung cancer.
Yeah.
If you are overweight, there is a 90% chance that you will become diabetic or pre-diabetic, 90%. And if you're diabetic, there's a 90% chance that you will become overweight or obese. So
it's a downward spiral, really. Yeah.
Vicious cycle. So anyone who's just like, oh, to lose weight is this vain thing, it's selfish. It's not. It's a severe medical condition that needs to be treated with medical and scientific rigor and compassion, because just one more fun stat, tobacco caused about a $50 billion burden on the healthcare system 2 years ago in 1 year.
Right.
Diabetes alone caused a $140 billion burden on the healthcare system. So imagine diabetes and obesity together.
Right. So this is a red alert situation. This is a 911 in America. That's our number to dial emergency. And this is something that you mentioned medical, which I understand there's a place to go and make sure that if you are diabetic, you need to treat things and not die, right? And address that. But your prescription really is not about using meds to address this, right? Which is exciting. And what I like about this, and I was teasing you a little bit about the Yet Another Diet book, is that you actually, not only you provide a step-by-step approach, but you explain it in layman's terms. I know there was some technical jargon thrown around here, but you do a great job of explaining it, which I really appreciate. And I do kind of like the, non-wrist slapping approach to, not telling me what to do, but showing me the way. And that's super exciting. So I know you have a ton of great blurbs from well-respected docs, many of whom I know, and I've met Dr. Hyman. You have him on the front here. So congratulations on having some really, really smart people review and comment on this book. I would say grab a copy, grab it on Kindle, grab a physical copy of it. Because sometimes, let me just say this. If I have a book like this, especially if it's a manual, a guide that's giving me a step-by-step, and it's laying around, that I'm much more likely to continue to pick it up and review it and make sure I know where I am than if it's sitting in the dustbin of my digital library on the Kindle. So I'd highly recommend, I do this a lot, I highly recommend having a physical copy and a Kindle edition. I don't know if there's a special for doing that or there's a discount. Sometimes they do, but I think it's worth having both. So if I were you, Jonathan, thank you so much for putting out Yet Another Diet book. But this is a very different one because this is the practical guide. I felt like there's the theory and then this is the practical guide, and you really probably listen to a lot of feedback running Sane Solution of how to put this in a way people could understand it. So grab that Setpoint Diet. You covered every question with poise and eloquence. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with?
The last thing, Buck, and I think you'll see this as you finish the book and hopefully as your readers and listeners, is that the fundamental shift that we're after with this approach is one of quality versus quantity. And I want to take that also personal and say that if you see this and it seems like it's challenging or why would I do this, one of the things that I hope you'll take away from the book is a fundamental belief that you are of the highest quality. And because you are of the highest quality, you deserve the highest quality. And that's one of the key things I hope you help that this book helps you to see and live for the rest of your life.
Amen. I mean, you do have a section in there on mindset, and I know that's a very important part of loving yourself and doing this for the right reasons. So thank you for, again, you just brought little tears to my eyes when you said that. Thank you again for doing this, putting this out, doing the work that you're doing, fighting the good fight. And I know this is going to impact millions of people. So Jonathan, hopefully you'll come back on the show and we'll talk again.
Thanks so much, Buck.
Thank you, Jonathan.